Okay, so True's coaching my logo and my symbol for my practice is a dragonfly, because dragonflies are actually stand for transformation. Most people think about butterflies, but dragonflies start off as water creatures and become airborne creatures. And they've been around since prehistoric times. So they're very, very strong. And yet you look at their wings and they seem very fragile. And that's like, people mistakenly think we women are fragile, but we are extremely strong. And dragonflies are obviously very adaptable, the fact that they've been around since prehistoric times. And they also can, they move like a helicopter up and down and sideways. So they have a lot of flexibility and adaptability. And that's also part of what we need to do in order to problem solve, in order to create a great life for ourselves. So that's why this is dragonfly. So the importance of self-care and how to implement it. So we all hear, like, I think it was Tammy who said she hears all about different people do self-care differently and what does it mean? And it means different things to different people. So I believe can I do this? I guess not. I thought I could type in while we were talking, but I guess that doesn't work. So I'm just going to go to the slide. Okay. So what do you think self-care is and what do you think it's not? And you want to speak up or you feel more comfortable in the chat? Didn't want you to see that yet. Anyone?
Well, I just think it's taking care of yourself, of course, but I do it in order to be able to take care of other people that I need to take care of as well. And I can be better in all ways if I do self-care, and it's sort of built into my life. You know, it's not something that, if I get to it, it means I have to maintain myself to be the best self I can be.
Very good. That's terrific, because a lot of people don't realize that. And I think it was, oh my goodness, some more. What did you, I got so caught up on some more. What is your first name again? S. Moore?
Oh, Selena.
Selena. I was going to say Sylvia, and I knew that wasn't right. Selena. Okay. Yeah, you were noticing that too before we got started, you were saying. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to show you what I think is the best definition I've ever seen for self-care. Isn't that a great definition? Because I think we do think about, oh, I'll do self-care. I'll take my Pilates class, or I'll remember to do my yoga, or I'll go out with the girls, or whatever. But I think this is just a really important point, that yes, it's nice to like Susan Watson is taking a little Airbnb staycation. I think that's really great, and it does help with self-care. I think though that, yeah, if our everyday life and vacations and things need, great to have that part of it, but not one where you feel like you constantly, gee, I need to leave this life that I have. I need to escape it. I think that's a great definition. A little bit different than we think of it. So understanding self-care, it really is the balance, and some of you have referenced this, between what we say is being selfish or self-denying. It's the balance between the two. So selfish, generally, it means that we're focusing on our personal needs and wishes, right? But here's the key: with little or no concern for the wishes and needs of other persons. Anybody know people like that? I think we all do, where they're just thinking about their own needs and no one else's. It's also, though, judgmental observation, criticism of one's character or maturity. So aren't we taught when we're young girls, don't be selfish, share that toy, Be nice to your friend. If she wants to play with that, let her play with that, and that type of thing. And we're talking that from a very early age. And when my daughter was little, she kind of has a controlling personality, I must admit. When friends were coming over, though, I would tell her, give me 1 or 2 toys that you don't want to share. And then everything else, her friends are allowed to touch. To play with. So I was trying to honor things that were very special to her, but it can't be everything. If you're having a friend coming over, they want to play with their stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So, okay. And now I think I'm talking more to the group that comes into this category, though, right? They're going like, they're being selfless. But you know what? When we focus on meeting the needs or needs of others, but it also involves some personal sacrifice of our wishes and needs. So it's the idea that their wishes and needs are more important than ours. And if we do that too much, that's where we get into the self-denying or self-depriving. And that can be very dangerous because without a balanced amount of self-care, people that end up just giving, they can end up being depressed, guilt-ridden, resentful, and bitter. Right. And so those of you who are here are saying, sounds like you're saying, wow, I need to get some self-care and understand how to do it before it morphs into this, resenting the people that I'm taking care of. And, we've all had a very strange year and a half where things have changed. And we ended up maybe taking care of people more so than we would have normally. It's been interesting to see for friends that who are married or in live-in relationships. It either brought them closer or they're about ready to kill each other. So it's been an interesting year all the way around. So that's the whole thing. We want to understand, how can we come up with this balance between the two? Because we don't want to be thought of as selfish. We are conditioned as women that being selfish is bad. That's why it's said I said earlier, it was a moral judgment. But what self-care really is, it's that healthy, balanced approach to responding to others' needs as well as our own. And you kind of weigh the importance of our own needs and those of others, right? And then you decide which needs or wishes take priority in each situation. In some situations, it is going to be the other person that's going to take priority, especially if you're taking care of young kids or the elderly. That may be what has to happen, but it doesn't need to happen all the time, right? Our needs and our wants and our wishes are really important. And as Selena said, otherwise there won't be anything left of you, and that's really important. So it respects others' needs and our own needs. And it acknowledges our need to receive from others, because a lot of times, especially if we're in the self-denying phase, people will say, can I help? And we foolishly may say, no, I've got it, right? I can do this. But we really need to know how we can receive graciously and without shame. And what shame means is like, wait a second, do they think I can't handle this? It's okay and imperative that we ask for help before it gets to the critical breaking point. So I mentioned to those who are on early that I'm going to Chicago, which is where I'm from, in case you couldn't tell by the way I talk, because sadly my brother-in-law has just been diagnosed with cancer, and that's on top of already having Parkinson's. And my sister is, definitely having issues, and her son, grandson, and their dog are living with them because they just went through a divorce. So I finally have convinced my sister to get help, right? And I finally convinced her to go see a therapist. It's funny, she has a sister who's a therapist, but she's never been in therapy before. So I know she's at her breaking point because she ended up doing both, right? But now with the diagnosis of cancer, I was waiting for their son and grandson and their dog to move out before I came to visit, because there's literally no place to sleep at the inn. But with that diagnosis, I was like, I'm coming now. And I'm literally bringing my own mattress. So now I'm not practicing good self-care, am I? I'm really giving her and her family priority. And yet I felt like I needed to, right? So in a way it was self-care. Now this is not the way I'm going to operate all of the time, right? This is just in this instance.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to be loving and caring of others as well as ourselves. That's what good self-care is. And as Selena alluded to, you can't pour from an empty cup. We have to take care of ourselves first. And, you know, like if I said to you guys, boy, I have this great project and it's going to help women all over the place. In fact, I'm going to give a big donation to Women's Resource Center of Alamance County. Yeah, but I need $1 million. And you might say, Trudy, I really want to give you $1 million, but I don't have it, right? We cannot give what we don't have. So we have to keep replenishing our own cup in different ways. And that's what the flight attendants, remember when you could fly?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what our flight attendants keep telling us, right? It's such a great metaphor and it's been used over and over again, but it is, what do the flight, I know you've heard it before. What do flight attendants tell you to do?
Cover your own mask first. Use your own mask first before you can care for others.
Yeah, and it is so true. They say, yeah. So what's our natural inclination if we're with somebody who's infirm or who's a child? We're going to help them first, right? But we can't even do that all the time without taking good care of ourselves. So to me, this is what standing up for yourself, this is what good self-care means. This is by Brene Brown, by the way, expressing our own needs, setting appropriate limits. And earlier, when I polled the people who were here before we got started, they hadn't been to any of my other programs, but I did a whole program on boundaries for Women's Resource Center. It's such an important topic. Now, this is what good self-care is. So how do we do this? How do we stand up for ourselves without feeling guilty? Isn't that the key? Feeling that we are worthy, because that is what self-care means. So otherwise we feel ashamed, or we blame others, or we have a sense of unworthiness, or sometimes we have erroneous beliefs. So I want to just, you're going to get this in a little worksheet that work booklet that we'll be sending out to you. But you know, some of the erroneous beliefs that can interfere with standing up for ourselves is things like everybody must love me. It's absolutely necessary that I have love and approval from peers and friends. So we might not, you know, we might have the sense of we're not worthy unless people love us. Or I must get along with everybody because I couldn't stand it if I hurt someone. And that goes along with self-sacrifice is necessary because my needs and wants are not as important as keeping the peace. You're going to get this whole sheet, but I think it's important to recognize that there are some erroneous beliefs that interfere with setting boundaries. They also interfere with us feeling a sense of worthiness, like I am unworthy unless I am of help to others. That's a belief that some people may have, right? And I know those who work for Women's Resource Center, just like I'm in a helping profession, we tend, when we gravitate towards helping professions, I think it's even more true for us, you know, because not only are we women who've been programmed this way, but then we choose helping professions, right? Bless you. So you will be getting more on the erroneous beliefs. But according to Brene Brown, these are the things that we need to get back a sense of self-worth. And when we have that, then we are better at practicing self-care. So we need courage, compassion, and connection. That's very different, isn't it, than we usually think of. By the way, this is from her book. Let me move this over. Gifts of Imperfection. So why isn't it moving? Come on. There we go. Okay. Back up. So courage. We often think that courage means heroics, right? We have to be superwoman and we have to have acts of courage. But that is not true. That is not what courage is. Or we might think like the Cowardly Lion did, that we need courage because we need to face danger. when we're afraid. And we may think that's what's necessary. And sometimes that danger is within ourselves because we're scared of what somebody else is going to say or think of us. But what courage really is, according to Brene Brown, and I really like this definition, it's to speak one's mind by telling one's heart. So it's being vulnerable, right? It's the willingness to be vulnerable. In her book, she used an example of her daughter was like 11 or 12 and at a slumber party and called for her mother to take her home. Now, would you say that was courageous or not?
I think it was courageous.
Kind of an interesting thing, isn't it? You might think, yeah, Jane, you might think it's courageous, like, oh, well, she should just stay and have the courage to stay, even though she's uncomfortable. But it also took courage for her to go in front of all her friends. I don't like this and I want to leave. She was being courageous. She was speaking her mind by telling her heart. And so sometimes that's what we need to do in order to practice self-care. We have to speak our minds by letting other people know what's going on and how we feel. We tend to think that people are mind readers, especially if they're living with us or we've had a long-term relationship with us. And guess what, guys? Nobody knows what you're thinking and feeling if you don't know. You know, oh, they ought to know better. They ought to know this is hard on me, blah, 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 blah. Well, you know what? If you haven't talked about it or shared it, I don't mean just complaining. It is important, though, to let people know what's going on with you, right? Okay. So compassion. So, of course, I chose Mother Teresa because don't you think of her when you think of compassion?
Yeah.
But compassion has an element of blame and shame in it because there's a tendency to think of the healer as kind of higher up than the person who's wounded. Instead, compassion really is a relationship between equals. It means accepting ourselves and others just as we are. That's having great compassion, not only for others, but for ourselves as well. So we need to have compassion if we're like being thrust into a caring capacity where we feel like we have to take care of others. We need to have compassion for ourselves as well in order to practice self-care. And this, I think, is really important to realize that there is a connection between boundaries, which we're going to talk about a lot, and accountability, acceptance, and compassion. Because when we're compassionate and accepting while we're holding other people accountable for their behavior, then we have self-care. Otherwise, we have resentment. So setting boundaries, which we'll talk about, and holding people accountable really is important in order to practice self-care, in order to be compassionate with ourselves. It's not being mean or nasty to the other people. That doesn't mean they're going to like it, especially if you've never set boundaries with them before. We'll talk more about that. But it's important that we stand up for ourselves. And then connection. So I think it's interesting in this day and age of all this technology, we tend to think, hey, we're connected to all these people all over the world. That's not it. What about the term friends on Facebook? I really dislike that name. You know, there's like, oh, I have 1,000 friends. Really, you don't have 1,000 friends. These people are not your friends. You may know their name, you know, and not much else. I think it does a disservice to the term friend. You know, I may have a contact on Facebook, just like I have contacts in my phone. They're not necessarily friends. It's a special relationship. And what it entails is the energy between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued. So how many of you have ever been to, well, this is in the day and age when we could easily go out to restaurants, but how many of you have ever been to a restaurant and looked around and seen families or friends, they're out with each other, but they're on their phones? They're either talking or texting other people. I remember one time I was out with two friends of mine, and we happened to have a table that was literally in the middle of the room. And I looked around, and we were the only people that were not on the phone. The only ones who were actually just engaging with one another in the whole room, including parents with little kids. Their kids are doing whatever, and they're on their phone. I know, granted, there's times when you need to be, but really, I just, So, anybody see the movie Avatar? I hear the sequel is finally coming out in December of 2021. I'm excited because I really like that movie.
One of my favorites. I love it.
Yeah. And, what was the thing they always said? I see you, right? They were connecting. I see you. And here's, what they say is, I see your soul and your true essence. I see who you really are. And I respect you, love you, honor you. I receive you. Therefore, I connect with you. That's true connection. Isn't that what we feel when we're really connected with our friends? Don't you just love friends because they know how crazy we are and they love us anyhow? That's because we get sustenance and strength from those relationships. So one of the most important qualities of self-care, which was so hard during COVID, was to keep these connections. I have been self-employed since 2017, and what I used to do, and so I don't have colleagues where I can poke my head in and say, hey, what's up, like I used to, and that kind of thing. So pre-COVID, I made sure I had lunches or dinners with friends, because I have, whether I'm being a coach or whether I'm being a therapist, I am in a profession that I keep giving to others, and that's appropriate. I should not be asking my clients to help me out, right? So I needed to get that sustenance from other people, and then boom, COVID hits, right? That was tricky for all of us. I'm sure we're all still kind of reeling from that. Now we're reeling from, oh, should we wear a mask or not? What is this? It's interesting. All right. Good self-care is also expressing our own needs. And in this booklet, you're going to get a worksheet on this. If we had more time, I would literally love to do this with you. But since we don't, I'm just going to show this to you and let you know that you have this in the booklet that's going to be emailed out to you. Okay. So anybody ever hear of iMessages before?
No.
People think when I say iMessages, iPhone or something, but no. An iMessage is when you state how you feel. And guess what, everyone? We are entitled to our own feelings. Have you ever told somebody something and they said, you shouldn't feel that way? Well, excuse me. This is how I feel, right? I just want you to, like we saw in Avatar, see me, understand this is how I feel. Now, in the American English, we use I feel a little bit incorrectly a lot of times. Like, I feel you're a jerk. That's not a feeling. That's an opinion or a thought, right? So if you can say between I feel and whatever comes next, if you can put that, as if, like, then you know it is not a feeling. I feel like you're a jerk. I feel as if you're being mean to me. Those are not feelings, right? I feel hurt. That's a feeling. So on the next page, I'm going to come back to this one, but on the next page is a list of emotions that you can use. And again, you're going to be sent this. Basically, all emotions fall into 4 categories. All these others are just nuances of them, but it's mad, sad, glad, and afraid. Those are the 4 categories of emotions, and we are entitled to all of them. So you go back here and you state, I feel sad, or I feel lonely, whatever it is, when, and now you state an objective, factual description. And what I mean by that is anybody was a fly on the wall, they would see the exact same behavior. They would not make an assumption. They would not jump to a conclusion. So let's take a real easy one. When my daughter was a teenager and she'd come home from school and she would drop her coat and her backpack and her shoes in the hallway when the closet is right there, right there.
Oh.
So now, anybody who saw that, now would I be correct or not correct, but would it be objective for me to say you are such a slob? That's a judgment.
Mm-hmm.
But I could say I feel upset when you drop your coat, your shoes, and your backpack in the middle of the foyer. Anybody would see that that's what happened, right? Now we state because. What's the because about? Well, what is our reason? I did notice that if I had just cleaned house, it bugged me a lot more than when I hadn't cleaned house. So it was the same event, actually, and I had different feelings about it. So I could say, well, because I just picked everything up around here, and then I want, and here's where our needs come in. You state your desire positively and as a request. What does that mean, a request? People are not going to hear you when you make a demand. Okay? Even if you say it with a please. And how do you know it's a demand? If you're angry and upset that they don't do it. It was a demand. You can state what you want. That doesn't mean that someone's going to honor it. However, when you set it up using an I message, you're more likely to get cooperation than you would have been if you hadn't. Because you're owning your feelings, you're not being derogatory or pejorative towards them, you're not saying you, you're stating why, and you're stating what you want. Anyone have any questions on this? Or want to make a comment? Okay, so this is important to stand up for yourself and getting your needs met. By the way, if you are in a relationship, whether it be a child, a partner, a parent, this is a great way to break through defensiveness if you want the person to really hear you. The other thing is we all have needs in different categories. And again, there is a worksheet on this. So our social needs. So on the worksheet, it says, what are you doing now to get your social needs met? So this means, just people you like to hang with, people, your friends, could be family members too. It could be your place of worship, but it's people that you really like just to hang with socially. And the question is, what are you doing now to meet your social needs? What is the frequency that you're doing it? And what frequency would you like to be doing it? Because you can often see that there's a gap between what you're doing and how often. And granted, with COVID and things in place, this has been very tricky to navigate. Then the second part of the worksheet says, what else would you like to do to meet your social needs? Okay. And then with what frequency? Then there's our emotional needs. What are you doing to meet your emotional needs? So we all have, again, we need to fill ourselves up like that cup. What are we doing to help our emotions? What are we doing to help ourselves keep balanced? What are we doing that makes us happy? Right? So what are we doing now? How often are we doing it? And how often would we like to ideally do it? And is there anything else you could think of that you would like to do to meet your emotional needs? In other words, how do you feel loved? So one of the things that I do is I have a dog and a cat. They meet my emotional needs a great deal, especially during COVID. I do not believe I would have handled it as well as I did if I had not had my critters to live with. Right? Mm-hmm. Because I don't have another human being to live with. Intellectual. So what are we doing to meet our intellectual needs? Same question. What are we doing now? What frequency? How often do we want to do it? And what are intellectual needs? Intellectual needs are things that we need to do to learn something new, to challenge ourselves. Human beings, in fact, all creatures are meant to grow and evolve. And we really do need to meet our intellectual needs, even if it's doing crossword puzzles, whatever it is. Just how are we creating new brain pathways? What are we doing? And what would we like to do instead, or not instead, in addition to? Now, our physical needs. So that means, what are we doing for our health and well-being? So it's not just let's exercise more, which is often what we hear when we say, well, we're going to do self-care. It's, as we know, it's getting enough rest. It's eating properly. It's all of those things. What are we doing to keep ourselves healthy physically? Now, in the case of COVID, what I did physically was I hunkered down in my house. You know, I was not one of the ones who was willing to take chances. I'm happy that now that I'm fully vaccinated that I'm getting out more. However, I did take advantage of being able to walk, right? After a day of being on the computer with clients all day, that was when I was done, I would go out and take an exercise walk. And, you know, we have beautiful weather. Again, I am so appreciative of our weather coming from Chicago. You can only imagine how much I appreciate that there's spring and there's fall. See, Chicago has 6 months of winter, 1 day of spring, 3 months of summer.
Oh,
It's a strange city. And creative, it's so important. How do we meet our creative needs? It might be something like writing poetry. It could be just journaling. That also might help meet our emotional needs. It could be, you know, what are we doing that's new and different? I like to paint furniture. So that's being creative. I actually feel creative when I'm creating my PowerPoint programs. I enjoy it actually because I'm creative while I do it. Again, what am I doing? How often am I doing it? How much, what's the frequency I want? And what else would I like to do? So I'm really looking forward to, I'm going to start to take art classes again, you know? So, and spiritual. Now, spiritual does not necessarily mean religious. It can, if that works for you. It means some belief in something that's bigger and higher than we are. It's being in touch with our own sense of worth. And again, how often are we doing that? And I know because of COVID, people who often relied on their church family or their place of worship family was cut off from that. What do they say? Do you guys know what they say are the things you need to do in order to keep your mental acuity as you age?
Learn something new.
That's one of them, absolutely.
Like music or new language.
Learn something new. Mm-hmm. Yep. What else?
Read.
Well, that could be one. Yeah, especially if it's intellectual. It is, yeah.
Meditate.
New.
Meditate.
Yeah, meditate. That's being physical because that's meeting our physical needs.
Mm-hmm.
What they say is actually the 3 most important ones are socializing, learning something new, and keeping physically fit. However, the other 3 that are up there are also extremely important. If you want to keep your mental acuity as you age, this is really important. This is not wants. These are needs. This is what we need to do. So a lot of times we put our needs into want category. Yeah, well, I'll do this when I have more time. Folks, it's really important that you make the time now. You know, one of the things that I realized years ago was that I wasn't making time to physically exercise. And then it dawned on me that no matter what was going on and no matter what the weather was in Chicago, because I have always had a dog. I always have a dog. I sometimes have a cat. I always had a dog, and I didn't have a fenced-in backyard. So guess what I needed to do 3 times a day, even in snowstorms, even in below zero weather. I had to walk my dog. And it occurred to me, so I walked my dog 15 minutes 3 times a day. And as much as I love my dog, it occurred to me one day, wow, I have the 45 minutes to take care of my dog. I have to have 45 minutes to take care of me. It was like mind blowing to me. As much as I've always loved my dogs. So as much as I love them, why were their needs more important than mine? Right? Now they are dependent on us, that's true, but we are also dependent on us. Like I said, we cannot take care of others if we don't take care of ourselves first. So there's a worksheet. Now, if you just listen to this for an hour and you think it's interesting, nothing is going to change in your life. I want you to really use the worksheets and to actually figure out how to implement them so that it's not just like a New Year's Eve resolution, right? I'm going to do this. No. There's ways to help yourself there's also, but by really knowing how important it is and making a commitment to yourself. And just like you would keep a commitment to other people, keep a commitment to yourself. Have an accountability partner if you need to. Somebody in your family or a friend or somebody who you commit, I'm going to do this and I am doing this. Because if we keep saying I'm going to, guess what happens? It keeps going into the future. Okay, so here, I mentioned it before, but again, setting appropriate boundaries. And again, for we women who are caretakers, this can be really tricky, but you really do have to draw the line somewhere. So what is a boundary? So I know for those of you who attended my program, this is going to sound familiar. And nonetheless, it's important to go over it again. So it's a limit or line over which you won't let anybody else cross because of the negative impact on you. So it's a set of limits and it's over your physical and emotional well-being. Just like you wouldn't let somebody come up to you and start fondling you and be inappropriately touching. How often do we let people become emotional vampires and let them do say inappropriate things, right? So it's our emotional and physical space that we need to be our truest selves, who we really are, without pressure from others to be something you're not. Okay. Anybody want this up for another moment?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right, ready to move on?
Yes, thank you.
So boundaries it's a crucial, necessary component of self-care because it's a way to protect and take good care of yourself. And remember, boundaries can be physical, psychological, and emotional. These are limits over which you are not going to let anyone else cross because it's a necessary aspect of mental health and well-being. And again, if we don't take care of ourselves, nobody else is. Right? So here's just some tips. And again, this is tricky when we're not used to doing it. Say no simply and firmly to something you don't want to do. You don't really even have to offer an explanation. Isn't that amazing? No, that's just not going to work for me right now. If you feel like you want to explain, do so, but not with an over explanation. We often come up with, well, I've got, I've got to wash my hair and I have to, yeah, I don't know, making up stuff. It's like you say, you know, that old thing about like why you can't go out on a date with somebody you don't want to go out with. I'm washing my hair. How about just saying no? Especially with people we really care about, you can be clear about your love while still being clear about your boundaries. And be prepared, because people, especially if you have not done this before, people are going to keep pushing you, and they may say, you're really being selfish. I want you to think about this. If people say you're really being selfish because you want to meet your own needs, or because you're saying no to something that really is beyond what you want to handle, what makes them not being selfish? They're being selfish by asking you to do that. We don't often think that. We take it in like, oh yeah, I'm being selfish to stand up for myself or to doing what's going to work for me. They're being just as selfish by asking you not to. Right? So, you know, an example is my sister would absolutely love if I were to move back to Chicago, and she and I are very close, and I do miss her. I do not want to live in Chicago. But her sons and her grandchildren live there. So I know she's not going to move. You know what, though? I know that she's very clear. She doesn't push me to move back to Chicago. She says, you made a really nice life for yourself in Greensboro. I can see why you like it there.
Good.
And then you set consequences for breaking boundaries, because unless you have consequences, the boundaries don't count. Right? So if you say to, you know, one of the boundaries I had with my daughter was, you know, you could keep your room as however you want. The rest of the house needs to be in order. And if things are not picked up by such and such a time, I get to decide what happens to them. Now you have to be prepared to do it. You know, you have to be prepared to donate toys to charity, or, you know, or to hide them someplace for, you know, a week or whatever, or whatever the boundary is, you know, like if you don't pick up if your clothes stay on the floor, they don't get washed, right? Or if you don't share doing the laundry, your stuff isn't going to get washed. There's just, you can say it with love. You can say it like, I get that you're really busy. That's a bummer. I get it. And if you want clean clothes, you're going to need to wash them. So you can have empathy. So expect, you know, pushback from others, and old patterns and systems where it's really easy for us to even get back into the old way of being. Because again, anything new, it's forming a new habit, and it takes time. In fact, it takes 62 consecutive days for anything to really stick. That's why my coaching programs are 3 months long, because a new habit takes at least 62 days. Poor self-esteem, and that's where we were going before when we were talking about courage and compassion, is we need to feel we are worthy. We are worthy of taking care of ourselves without any feelings of guilt and selfishness, because they're such a pejorative terms. And we're back to those erroneous beliefs. Those are the obstacles that can get in our way of clearly setting boundaries. You're going to get this in your handout as well. I think this is a great illustration and reminder for ourselves. And believe me, I have to go back to this myself time and again. So we're responsible for what's in that circle. Okay. The things that are outside of that circle are not our responsibility. How often do we make something else become our responsibility, though? Whether it's our child, our spouse, our parents, what other people think of me, you're not responsible for that. There's a quote of like, what someone thinks of you is none of your business. So again, you'll be getting this, so you don't really have to write it down. It's important to recognize when you are taking on responsibility that does not belong to you. So here is another thing that can be kind of tricky. So we're going to practice how setting boundaries, right? So you think about, okay, people and relationships. So you ask yourself, do they have a positive influence on my life? If yes, they stay in your life. If no, they go out of your life. Now, I know I'm making this sound easy. It's simple. It's not easy. I recognize it's not. And you may choose to keep people in because you're related to them or whatever, and you don't want to break that relationship. But then for sure, setting boundaries with how they're going to be in your life is really important. So I'm going to read to you. Can I find it? How a client of mine named Jackie, which by the way is not her real name, but how she set boundaries. So Jackie had a new baby, and her sister, with whom she always had a few issues with, was coming over. Her sister was not married, but she was coming over, and she was telling her, she was coming over without letting her know. She would just pop in. And she would then criticize or tell Jackie what she was doing wrong in terms of raising this baby without any experience, by the way. Now, Jackie already had issues with this sister, and she still wanted her to be part of her life. Here's where iMessages can be very helpful. So she set the boundary, you must call before you come over, right? And recognize that sometimes it'll be fine and sometimes it won't. And I am raising my child. If I'm doing what I think is right, and I really want you to keep your opinion to yourself. And if you do these things, you can continue to come over. And if you don't, I won't be seeing you for a while. Now that's tough, right? It's her sister. She did it with compassion. She did it gently. She was very clear though, because she knew she was getting so resentful. She didn't want her sister over. And Jackie's husband was freaking out with the sister always stopping by unexpectedly. It was his house too. So you get what so there's ways that you can keep somebody, and then there's times when they're just out. You have a friendship, maybe you've had a friendship of 30 years, but it's not a positive influence. Then maybe it's time to cut the friendship. Or whatever relationship it is. So our own emotions and thoughts, or other people, are you taking ownership? It's not, or are you blaming others? Like, you made me angry. Nobody else can make us feel anything without our permission. Even if you say you hurt me, I feel hurt when you did such and such. But I'm still the one who chose to feel hurt. It's a whole other program which I've done about how you can reframe those things. Okay? Mm-hmm. But you want to look at taking ownership, then those emotions and thoughts are in. If no, they're out. If somebody's just constantly blaming others, those are out. And if you're not, then those are in. Habits and behaviors. Well, there's a whole bunch there, right? But is this beneficial for my well-being and health? That's what you need to ask yourself. If so, they stay in, and if not, they go out. So there's a lot of things that we could think about of habits that might need changing. Smoking perhaps is one that's, a fairly obvious one. But there are others that we may choose to do or not, depending on how we feel about it. Sometimes one of the habits that I have is I don't watch the news. I haven't watched the news since the 80s on a regular. When Andrew Weil, who's a MD from Harvard, said, if you want to release stress, don't watch the news. My dad used to go, oh my God, how can you not watch the news? Don't you need to know what's going on in the world? And I would say very clearly, well, I'll find out because people will talk about it. And then if I choose to, I will, this is before the internet, I'll read about it in Newsweek. Now, if it's something I choose to, I will look it up on the internet. One thing to be really careful with is refrain from falling asleep in front of the news. A lot of people fall asleep with the TV on. It programs your brain. It really does. Our brain accepts whatever we tell it, whatever it hears in the senses. And since the news focuses so much on the negative, it's a good idea to just not listen to it, especially right before you're going to sleep. So other things you might want to cancel are things like comparing yourself to others, because joy comes from our own sense of self-worth, not comparison. Deciding whether something is worth arguing about, trying to get someone to change their way of being. You know what? If somebody had a different, let's just look at this political thing that we just went through. You going to change anybody else's political mind by arguing with them? I had already decided what I believed, and I decided I wasn't going to listen to anything else. Now, in this case, sometimes it's helpful for somebody to give you a new point of view if it's hurtful. I was just very firmly committed to my point of view, and I wasn't going to accept anything from anybody else. So I would say we just need to agree to disagree. That's it. Not argue about it. You might want to refrain from being with people who complain or blame or condemn and criticize. There's a saying that everybody makes me happy, some by staying and some by leaving. So, procrastination might be a habit that you want to break. If you act, whether or not you think it's the correct thing to do, action in itself is its own reward, though. There's very few things that we do in life that are irrevocable. Very few. Of course, death being one, but almost anything else, can be changed. You take a new job, you don't like it, you change it. I'm not saying it's all that easy, and you can do it. You're in an absolutely miserable marriage, you can change it. And you change it either by accepting what is, or setting boundaries and having your partner stick to it, or you leave the marriage. I mean, those are our choices. We accept things as they are, or we make changes to our way of thinking so that we can accept them, or we leave. Those are our choices. You might want to release things like doubting yourself, or bringing smartphones into the bedroom, aimlessly social media browsing. Anybody ever get sucked down that hole? I rarely get on Facebook, because what I find is when I do, all of a sudden, 20 minutes has elapsed. So I rarely get on. I only get on when I get a message that my daughter has posted a picture, because I want to see my grandchildren. So that's about it. Then I don't get on it. But once I go looking at their pictures, all of a sudden I'm scrolling. So anyhow, so those are all things that are helpful for setting boundaries. Sometimes we can do all of this by ourselves, and other times we really need to get some help, because we all have our own blind spots. Every good coach or therapist I know has been in therapy or has a coach. right? It helps us see things more objectively, make sure we're going to the right direction. And it helps us to hold ourselves accountable. Like with meeting those needs, you can have an accountability partner. So whether it's me or someone else, I would encourage you, if you think you can do all of this on your own, maybe you would have done it already. This was not rocket science. I probably did not tell you anything that you didn't already know on some level. So why aren't we taking care of ourselves to the best of our ability? There's something that gets in our way. And if you just want to reach out to me, email, or ask a question or whatever, please feel free to do so. And is it okay if I think Kate has your emails, and is it okay if I put you on my email list and send you things about my blogs and different things like that? If it isn't, be sure to let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to ask, or let Kate know. Otherwise, I'm going to ask Kate to send me your contact information. So if you don't want it, here's good with setting boundaries. If you don't want anything else from me, then be sure to let Kate know that. Okay, and it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine if you just reach out to me and that's all you want to do is just have one little question answered. That's perfectly fine as well. Okay. So I did ask Kate, I would have been sending this booklet out myself, but as I mentioned, I'm leaving for Chicago. So I sent the workbooklet that I created to Kate so that she can send it to you guys. And some of what I said is going to make more sense when you can have the worksheets in front of you. Anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Trudy.
Oh,
I love this information. It was so good. It's nice to have it reiterated, even if it's 1,000 times or the first time. It's so helpful.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah. Trust me, I have to remind myself of this stuff even when I teach it. You know, I had to figure out, like today, I couldn't leave before today to go to Chicago. And I had to figure out whether or not to stay for this presentation or not. And I thought, yep, people are counting on me. I'm going to do it. So for me, it was self-care to stay, and I'll just leave later.
Thank you.
We appreciate that, Trudy. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was funny because I have one of my friends who's a therapist.